Good morning, everyone. Um, this is another in the series of talks that I'll be giving on Fridays. And yeah, we just will have a maybe brief Q&A at the end of them. And some people had asked questions, and some of those I may not be able to we may not be able to address during this session, but Ajahn Chunda and I will probably address them together on Tuesday. So, anyways, it's good to be with everyone. Good morning. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang dhammang sanghang namasami. So, I thought I'd speak today on mindfulness of breathing. And it can sound, I think, initially like a technical subject or maybe out of keeping with last week's topic, which was grace and its place in the Buddha's teaching. But the practical application of breath meditation and the ability to cultivate it effectively, I think gives us enormous resources as practitioners to access and stay steady on this path and to access those deeper realms of grace and intimacy with life. The fruit of mindfulness of breathing, when practiced effectively, is an immense resource of well-being and a calm mind. And not only does that let us have the resources to confront our pain and to look squarely at the difficulties and loss in our life, because we have these internal resources available of well-being and calm, but also the reacquaintance we can cultivate with the body if we become relatively well acquainted with or skilled at mindfulness of breathing allows us to access the more pure and deeper elements and voices in us. That small voice and intuition, which I spoke of briefly last week, that can really guide us in life, is something that I find is very much associated with the body. And if we're alienated from our hearts and from our bodies, then we don't have access to that. And so this these practical steps of breath meditation can seem dry and maybe mechanical at first, but I think it's similar to a violinist getting to know their instrument. And one might have to practice scales quite a lot and become skilled at drawing a smooth stroke across the strings. But when that note is made pure and lucid, then you're able to actually play really beautiful music. And I think that's what mindfulness of breathing does, is it's perfecting our instrument. And the Buddha referred to mindfulness of breathing as the abode of the Tathagata. So it was the meditation he really held up as primary in many ways. And my sense of it is that many of these other meditations, which can be recommended, like mantra meditation or even loving kindness meditation, when cultivated with, say, phrases like "May I be well," "May I be happy," um, they're fragile and limited because what they are is applied perceptions. They're just words, and if and my experience is that the defilements, the darker forces in our minds, catch on pretty fast. And I think we've all had the experience of finding a phrase of, say, a metta meditation or a loving kindness meditation, and it works great for a day, but then after a few sessions, it just has lost all of its power. And one of the fruits of becoming reacquainted with the body is that it's a far more robust resource in terms of meditation. You're accessing these deep sources of vitality and well-being, and they, I find, can give far more than just these simple perceptions, and they strengthen and potentize all these other sort of auxiliary meditations like mantra meditation or phrases of loving kindness. If they're backed up by the energy of the body and the breath, then they gain a lot of power. And so, all that to say that mindfulness of breathing is a really important thing to cultivate. And I think that it's been taught in ways that haven't always been effective in the West. And you might have heard the term the jhana wars. And what I think that refers to is the fact that for a long time you may have heard this meditation instruction of just bring your mind or your attention to the nose and watch the breath go in and out and try not to control it. And there's a sutta where it's called the Aritta Sutta, and the Buddha asks the monks how they should cultivate mindfulness of breathing. And one of the monks, Aritta, says, I put aside thoughts of the past and thoughts of the future and just watch the breath mindfully. And the Buddha kind of rolls his eyes and says, that is mindfulness of breathing. I don't deny it. But as to how mindfulness of breathing is practiced in full, listen and I will speak. And then he gives the full discourse on the mindfulness of breathing, the Anapanasati Sutta. So this practice is engaged and quite active, actually, and there's a lot to be explored there. So the mindfulness of breathing sutta, the Anapanasati Sutta, it's Majjhima Nikaya 119, and it is composed of 16 steps. So we won't get through all of them here, I think, but just to run through the basic ones, in the first few, one begins by mindfully watching the breath go in and out, taking a short breath, then a long breath. And then one becomes sensitive to the whole body while breathing in and out. And then one breathes in and out, calming the bodily fabrications, is the term. So those are 4 steps. Breathing in long, knowing I breathe in long. Breathing out long, knowing I breathe out long. Breathing in and out short, that's number 2. Then experiencing the whole body or becoming sensitive to the whole body, and then calming the bodily fabrications. And then after that, there are 4 other steps. I mean, there's 12 more steps, but just the four that perhaps we'll speak of here are one breathes in and out experiencing rapture, one breathes in and out experiencing pleasure, and then one breathes in and out becoming sensitive to the mental formations, and one breathes in and out becoming calming the mental formations. And the 16 steps, of which I just spoke of 8, are divided or categorized into tetrads or groups of 4. So the first 4, dealing with breathing in and out, short, long, experiencing the whole body, and calming the bodily fabrications, are the first tetrad. And then the latter 4, which I spoke of, experiencing rapture, pleasure, experiencing the mental fabrications, and calming the mental fabrications, that's the second tetrad. And then there are 2 more, but I think this is plenty for today. So the classic instruction around breath meditation of bringing one's mind or attention to the nose and not controlling the breath, I find problematic for 2 reasons. One is that we are extremely active and controlling people in the current Western, college-educated society, or as sort of individuals brought up in this society, our minds are very active, and to just tell ourselves to not control the breath at the very beginning of a meditation is, I find, extremely difficult, and frequently just leads to this sort of clenching up and trying not to control, which is problematic. So, and Ajahn Thanissaro speaks about this, saying that, we have this tendency to control, and if we try to not control at the beginning of a meditation, it tends to just work on a subterranean level and clam everything up. So it's much better to work with on the surface, actively and voluntarily and consciously, this will to sort of direct things. So what that points to is the initial 2 steps of this breath meditation of knowing in and out breathing long and short are fairly simple. One can adjust their breathing depending on what feels right and calm. But then this 3rd step, experiencing the whole body, is one that is really important and has been the subject of a lot of controversy, because the commentaries speak about this whole body as the whole body of the breath at the nose. So just keeping your attention on one point and tracking in and out. And if that's all that one can do with one's awareness, then, with really the active minds that we have, I think it actually can work very well for a person who's had an upbringing as, say, a farmer in rural Thailand, and spent much of their life doing very focused tasks. But Tanpor Lee, one of the teachers in our tradition, speaks about how many people today really have very active minds, and to try to force the mind to remain at one point right off the bat, it's a lot like taking a classroom full of rowdy children and, the substitute teacher just trying to yell at them until they're quiet and do a test or something. However, the interpretation of the whole body, which the teachers more and more have been pointing to, and understanding the term to indicate, is actually the whole body. And that is to say that if one takes the breath not just as this air going in and out of the nostrils, but rather the breath energy. The In different cultures, it's referred to as different things: the chi or the prana in yoga, um, pana in Pali. These sort of subtle energies which course through the body and which were a part of the understanding of what the breath was, the vital energy was in the Buddha's time. Then this breath meditation could be much, much more than just staring at this point at the nose. Rather, it can be a becoming acquainted with the entire flow of this breath energy through the body. And that provides a much wider range and potential for exploration and um, active mindfulness of breathing. That's very interesting and can work with the thinking mind initially rather than against it. Um, I think a good metaphor would be, instead of the teacher just yelling at the kids to stay in their seats and take a test, the teacher can kind of let them outside and do a wholesome activity, run around for a while. And then after they've gotten some of their energy out, then they come back in the classroom and can settle down at one point if they want, say, the tip of the nose in this case. But to initially allow this wider realm of exploration and mindfulness of breathing is very helpful for the active mind. So in terms of cultivating this whole-bodied awareness, which I find works much, much more effectively for Westerners, and it's how I've seen Ajahn Jeff teach mindfulness of breathing now. It's how I've seen Ajahn Jayasaro teach it, Longpo Suchitto. Ajahn Pasanos teaches it this way much of the time, Ajahn Karuna Dhammo. Most teachers I've spoken to or practiced with really acknowledge that this is a very powerful way to work with mindfulness of breathing. So some skillful means of really dropping the awareness from the head, where it's almost always located, to the whole body and into the torso and the heart, and becoming acquainted with the breath energy's flow in these other parts of the body. There's two really good manuals online, Keeping the Breath in Mind and With Each and Every Breath, in which Ajahn Jeff runs through some very basic steps. But there's several visualizations you can use, imagining the energy of the breath as light, coursing down through the top of the head and down through the body, the left side, and out the left foot, and then up through the right foot and up the body and to the top of the head. One can imagine sort of this is a Longpo Suchitto visualization, but a sort of warm butter melting down the back of the neck and sort of coursing down the body. And these sound silly, but they do work. I think one of the most simple ways is most systems of across cultures of looking at how the breath energy moves, the subtle energy, whether it be in Kundalini yoga or Qigong, is that the breath energy moves up the spine, the main meridian, as they call it, and then down the front of the body. And so cultivating moving one's awareness with through this circuit of the breath energy, and establishing one's awareness at different points along this circuit and breathing for a time at that point allows one to sort of slowly expand their awareness of how these energies move and become sensitive to them. So the what I've seen Longpo Suchitto and Ajahn Jayasaro tend to teach is just imagining the body separated into three different chambers, one at the head area, one at the torso, and then one sort of down by the belly button. And just establishing the awareness at each of these points in sort of a a broad, loose awareness there, and just breathing for a time there, and becoming sensitive to how it feels, and if it feels good. One can, establishing awareness sort of around the head, and then if it gets tight or it becomes less engaging, the mind will naturally want to move on, and then you drop it to the torso and breathe there for a while, and then drop it to the belly button and then breathe there for a while, and then expand the awareness to encompass the whole body and breathe there for a while. And then you can repeat. Do all three chambers, staying at each point as long as feels appropriate or interesting, and then expanding for the whole body. And just move in circuits like this, a little like a dog kind of circling its bed before lying down. And to supplement this, one can imagine sort of a ball of light as the breath, expanding and contracting with the breath at each of those points. You can experiment with moving the awareness to the left and right side of the body, each of these points. And you'll usually find that one side is much more numb than the other. And you can correct that over time by slowly cultivating awareness of the breath energy in this way. And over time, one finds that there are flavors of the breath at each of these points, and certain resonances. For example, around the chest, there's near the heart, there's a great deal of potential for metta. And and these are very useful ways of becoming acquainted with the whole body and of this sort of engaged anapanasati, mindfulness of breathing. Tanpor Lee refers to each of these as the stations of consciousness, basically, in the head, the throat, the heart, and then down by the what Chinese medicine refers to as the dantian, or right sort of above the belly button, or near the belly button. And there are others, but those are sort of main points that also correspond roughly to the chakras. So when one cultivates that sort of awareness over time, it's a fun exploration, and it works a lot with the thinking mind rather than against it. Because it's interesting, it's active, it's engaged. And over time, after one makes several circuits, the mind does naturally settle down. And at that point, one comes to the spot where the breath feels most prominent. It might be sort of near the heart or at the nose, but keeps the awareness wide as well, sort of like a spider resting at the center of a web, but sensitive to all the spots at the web. That when one does this, the whole body and the breath energy becomes something that you do become acquainted with. And this is the sort of fulfillment of that third step of becoming sensitive to the whole body. The fourth step of calming the bodily fabrications, one will find that the breath becomes more and more subtle as one does this and calms down. But also that as one moves through the body, you begin to realize it's a very interesting place. Much of our trauma and pain is held in the body. So there are these bodily formations, kaya sankhara. Officially, or in the suttas, it's referred to explicitly as the breath, but Ajahn Jeff also has spoken of them as being related to the knots in the body, the sort of perceptual knots in the subtle body, which are associated with trauma and tension and pain. So many of us have one, say, in the throat, or you may experience a knot around the heart and in the chest associated with fear, or down below. And as the energy begins to move and circulate freely, then these knots become very apparent because they're blocking that circulation. And one can really work on relaxing them and calming them, either visualizing light kind of coursing through them, or just almost just touching them lightly with awareness, with a bright and gentle touch. And that when, and similarly, when thoughts come up, frequently they'll be associated with a point of tension. Sort of, there'll be a sensation in the body, and then the thought will come up. And one can calm the sensation first, and then the thought will dissolve. So as these bodily formations calm, as we relax them, then this flow of energy becomes smooth and becomes a source of a lot of refreshment, which is the next step in the mindfulness of breathing sutta, is becoming sensitive to rapture. And piti, which is translated here as rapture, may not be the best translation. I think refreshment is a better one, because piti, it's etymologically related to the verb to drink. And there is this huge sense of well-being that comes when the subtle energy of the breath is allowed to circulate freely in this way. And so a good litmus test, I'd suppose, of if one is practicing those first four steps correctly, is if afterwards one is beginning to experience this sense of refreshment, this welling up of real a feeling of sustenance, and we realize as soon as that begins to kind of come up that in many ways we've been starving for it. It's such a boon to have, and when one begins to feel it and drink it in, it really feels like a dry sponge soaking it in. So, yeah, these are practical instructions that the Buddha gives. I find that many Westerners, we're so alienated from our bodies that there needs to be some expedient means to drop the awareness from the head into the heart. So many teachers in our tradition use Qigong. I know yoga can help. I find cold showers are helpful personally. But this is not a dry practice. When one finds a way to cultivate this calm and settled sense of well-being in their life and in meditation, then one gains access to a happiness which is one's own and is much less fragile than those happinesses which are dependent on those around us, on certain experiences, on the body's ability to go skiing or be healthy or out of pain. It's a resource that can be there for us constantly. And also, once this breath energy has circulated for a while, the body will calm. And that's the next step of sukha, or pleasure, in the mindfulness of breathing sutta, is this sense of happiness that's settled, and one can rest in that. And Ajahn Chah would compare the calm mind to a pond, at which animals can come and drink, and you can watch them come and go. And if one finds that measure of calm in life and manages to cultivate it, then one gains access again to the more delicate creatures of one's nature. Those small but most important voices, which have been ignored and covered over for years. And I think that's important because the voice of Dhamma in our lives, the voice that tells us what we need and at our deepest level of being want and what is worthy of us and the pure path through any situation, that voice is usually a very quiet voice. And only by cultivating the space of calm do we gain regular access to it, and can it guide us. I think that the Buddha speaks about a way of being in the world which is in harmony with it. And this is a phrase he uses frequently, is that one can dwell in harmony. And that implies a deeper song and a deeper music that is underlying, that one can bring oneself in tune with. And for me, that's what, say, the Arahants are completely in tune with, namely that they undertake only actions which are completely pure, and that in every situation there's a way of acting and conducting ourselves which is completely in tune and blameless in that situation, no matter how difficult it is. And I think that thread that leads us along that path is a delicate one and is frequently lost. Our hands are so often shaking, and we are so often hungry, starving for some sort of distraction or pleasure or escape from our pain. So, if one finds a way to cultivate this space of quiet and these resources of deep internal happiness, then one gains access to that voice. And it's a voice that lives in the body more than anywhere else. Many teachers have said the chitta, or what the Buddha, what we translate as the heart mind, is the seat of the chitta is in the heart. And only once we kind of gain acquaintance with the body again can we have access to that. So far from being this mechanical or dry practice, anapanasati, mindfulness of breathing, if practiced correctly, is a homecoming to what the more gentle voices in ourselves, to the most important voices of ourselves. And and in that we're learning to strike a pure and constant note in the midst of this song. I think I only managed to get through a few of those steps, but hopefully it wasn't too much. But I found that this way of practicing mindfulness of breathing saved my practice, and many of the monks I know, this has saved theirs as well. So I think it's important to speak to, and perhaps it'll work for you, perhaps not. And not to say that at the end of that practice of letting the mind move around the body and explore it and actively work with it, one doesn't come to one point and gain that sort of one-pointed focus, but that initially you have to let the kids in the classroom run around for a while, or at least many of us do. So, I hope that wasn't too dry or academic. We have time for some questions now, if people have them on the live chat. Mm. Yeah. So Ivy Young has spoken about trying to fight herself to a single point of focus. Yeah, you're not alone. This has been, I think, the great failure of samadhi practice in the West, and I just find maybe 5%, 10% of Westerners can pull it off. I mean, I'm making, obviously, I don't have statistics on this, but from what I've seen, very few Westerners can cultivate that sort of meditation effectively right off the bat. We're such neurotic, um, beings completely alienated from our bodies, and that was not the case in the time of the Buddha. Um, and so the to very consciously point towards how to reacquaint ourselves with the body is essential. Um, and really, like, this is how most ajahns in our tradition now are teaching this, as far as I can tell. And yeah, one of the great secrets in our tradition seems to be that many of the senior teachers practice qigong. I've asked many. Ajahn Sucitto teaches it regularly at retreats. So and it's just a much more fun way to practice anapanasati. It's yeah, it's there's a lot of fun things to explore in the body, like the energies and the resonances at these different, say, chakras or stations of consciousness. There's a lot to be said there, and the energy and vitality one gains is extremely sustaining, um, and very powerful. For example, the ability to cultivate metta by simply bringing the awareness to the heart is extremely, if one has cultivated this ability to work with the breath energy, one can uh, really empower one's metta practice. Similarly, with pain, um, if there's pain in the body, one can use the breath energy and visualize it to move through the pain to relax it. And but these are things that are only possible once one has sort of cultivated this awareness of these energies and how they're supposed to move and what it feels like when they're calm and what it feels like when they're tense. Is there a reference to the exercise you mentioned, shifting awareness from left to the right as you move down the three centers of the body? Um, what I would point to is, I think, honestly, I know I reference Ajahn Jeff a lot, but he's just given such practical instructions on this way of cultivating meditation, and he's translated Ajahn Lee, who was a senior teacher in the Thai forest tradition, who really opened up this way of breath meditation for everyone in our tradition. Um, And so I would go to dhammatalks.org and look up his Keeping the Breath in Mind, or With Each and Every Breath. And he'll point to, this moving the awareness to the left and right. He also has a great article called, it's on Access to Insight and dhammatalks.org, I believe, on working with pain. Um, so that's quite helpful. Yeah. When I go through the body, I am quickly thrown off by subtle, energetic unpleasantness that carries a message of doing it wrong. Any suggestions? Um, I would say the. It's hard to say, Greg, without knowing more about how you're working with it. I would say prepping the energy is important. If you come into this sort of awareness of the breath, I mean, one of the reasons our awareness doesn't want to go to the body is because the breath energy can be hot and cramped from how we live. Most of our diaphragms are tight and tense, and we've been sitting, say, at a desk most of the day. So if you can do a bit of prep work before sitting, like walking meditation, taking a cold shower, I know it's silly, but it really works for me. Qigong, a bit of yoga, some way of clarifying and purifying that energy before you sit. Usually that can help a lot. And then just experimenting with these different ways of working with the breath. Like sometimes visualizing the energy streaming through the crown of the head to the feet, it might be too active, and your mind doesn't want that much activity. But sometimes that's exactly what it wants. Um, but then you might try really, yeah, staying at one point, in the head and here, and just sort of remaining at those 3 points. You may want to try breathing through the back. Sometimes we have too much of our awareness at the front of our bodies, so breathing through the kidneys. I mean, just a visualizing light with the breath. Sounds silly, but it really can be effective. So experiment, play. I mean, that's part of the point of this is that it lets you play with this meditation, and you can learn some very interesting things. Yeah, yoga with Karina. So, oh, great. So, yeah, Karina, good to see you. A avid practitioner at Abhayagiri and very experienced with yoga. And yeah, sent a helpful email on how there's a lot of similarities with what I've been speaking, what the Buddha speaks about, and yoga. And I find that that's the case, is that most cultures have encountered this in some way, shape, or form. The systems of visualizing the breath body across traditions are quite similar, actually. Great, great, Adam. Adam asks, once piti and sukha have arisen and are steady, how do you know when to let go of vitaka and vichara? Oh man, that's a big question. I might wait for a second on that and address Mary Webster's question. E. Webster, is there a difference between men and women for moving the energy down the left or right of the body? Good, Mary. I think you may have actually read Ajahn Jeff's treatise about the breath energy uh, with each and every breath, or keeping the breath in mind. I forgot which. And yes, this is the visualization I mentioned with moving the light down through the crown of the head and down the body, out the foot. Um, Tanpurli, I think, recommends women move it down the left side first and up the right side, and men move it down the right side and up the left side. I could be wrong about that. I It may matter a lot. I've never found it's terribly. I've had a lot of problem with it either way, but that might be worth looking into. And yes, I do remember that it is different for the different genders. For me, that technique is limited to when my mind's very active, much more this working with the circuit or down the front of the body and up the spine is effective, and that's the same for both genders. So, Adam, yeah, once piti and sukha have arisen and are steady, how do you know when to let go of vitaka and vichara? So, for those who don't know, vitaka and vichara means directed thought and evaluation. And when we're working with these visualizations, vitaka and vichara are usually characterized as verbal. Um, so, saying, uh, you know, I may the breath move down one side of the body, or be with the breath, with the breath. Um, so first of all, I find that if one is using verbal mental vitaka vichara, directed thought and evaluation, it's very good to phrase the phrases as questions, because we tend to be so overbearing as Westerners that giving yourself an order, it's just too much. But if you ask yourself a question like, where do I feel the breath? How does the breath feel good? Can I take a long breath? Um, it's much more receptive and open and gentle. However, these visualizations of light, say, are also vitaka vichara, also directed thought and evaluation. And um, the difference between these terms is usually compared to the ringing of a bell and the listening to its resonance. So vitaka, directed thought, is the ringing, and then vichara, or the evaluation, is tasting it or listening to the resonance. So what I think that manifests for usually is you apply a perception. For example, imagining the light running down one side of your body, or a ball of light expanding and contracting with the breath at any of those three chambers. And then you'll find that you become involved with it and just want to kind of taste it, and the mind becomes absorbed in that sensation of the breath. And that's the tasting, that's the listening to the ring. And as things get calmer, I find that the vitaka, the directed thought, the ringing of the bell, um, can slow, and you need to do it less, and the tasting lasts longer and longer until you only, when things get really calm and this piti and sukha, this refreshment and pleasure, become really saturate the body, and one's really resting in that, the mind is just calm. And at that point, frequently you only have to drop in one of these perceptions or questions like, where do I feel the breath, or breath? Because at that point, it may be so calm that you don't need to um, have these complex visualizations. It might just be enough to say breath. Um, when the mind's calm, I find dropping in one of those perceptions briefly and then just letting it resonate for a long time and just letting the mind sit there and taste the energy um, for longer and longer periods. It works well. And I think there comes a point where uh, you'll sense it. It's just too much stress to even drop in the um, directed thought anymore. And one just wants to sit there tasting the breath energy and the pleasure. Um, so I'd say to let it happen naturally. So that was a lot. I apologize if it was too much, but hopefully next week we'll. I think someone requested a talk on grief and mourning, so maybe it'll be a bit more along those abstract lines. But I thought it was important to at least speak to what's been so helpful to me personally. And once again, I'm so grateful for the chance to be a part of this community. It's very inspiring and sustaining as a monk to be close to so many people who really understand the preciousness of the Dhamma and of this path, and that there's nothing in life that's more worthy. And to have a community that gets that, even if it's on YouTube Live, is one of the greatest gifts of a life. So I'm very grateful, and I hope you all take care and stay healthy.